I never believed in fate until the night I met him in Las Vegas. My name is Lillian Hayes, and I'm a 28-year-old obstetrics resident at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago. 20 months ago, I made a decision that would alter the entire trajectory of my life, though I didn't know it at the time. It was March 15th, 2 years ago. I'd just completed the most grueling 72-hour shift of my residency, delivering 9 babies back-to-back, including a set of triplets that nearly didn't make it. My attending physician, Dr. Richardson, saw the exhaustion etched into my face and practically ordered me to take a long weekend. "You're burning out, Hayes," she'd said, her stern expression softening. "Go somewhere. Anywhere. Just get out of Chicago for a few days." My best friend Sarah, a labor and delivery nurse, had been planning a girls' trip to Las Vegas for months. I'd initially declined, too focused on my career to indulge in frivolous getaways. But standing there in the hospital corridor, my scrub stained with someone else's blood, and my hands still trembling from the adrenaline of a complicated delivery, I realized I needed to escape. I needed to remember what it felt like to be just Lillian, not Dr. Hayes, not the woman who held other people's lives in her hands every single day. Las Vegas assaulted my senses the moment I stepped off the plane. The desert heat, the constant cacophony of slot machines, the desperate energy of people trying to outrun their ordinary lives. It was intoxicating and overwhelming all at once. Sarah dragged me to every tourist trap on the Strip. The Bellagio fountains, a Cirque du Soleil show, overpriced cocktails at rooftop bars where we pretended to be the kind of women who did this regularly. On our second night, we ended up at the Venetian's High Roller Lounge. I'd changed out of my comfortable jeans into a black dress Sarah had forced me to pack, claiming I needed at least one outfit that didn't scream, "I live in a hospital." The dress hugged curves I'd forgotten I had, and for the first time in months, I felt like someone other than the perpetually exhausted resident who smelled faintly of antiseptic. That's when I saw him. He sat alone at the bar, a tumbler of what looked like expensive whiskey in his hand, his dark suit perfectly tailored to his broad shoulders. Everything about him screamed danger and power. The way he held himself, the deference shown to him by the bartender, the almost predatory alertness in his dark eyes as they scanned the room. He looked like he owned the place, or possibly the entire city. Our eyes met across the crowded lounge, and something electric passed between us. I should have looked away. I should have grabbed Sarah and fled to the safety of our hotel room. Instead, I held his gaze, something reckless and desperate unfurling in my chest. He approached me with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. "You don't belong here," were his first words to me, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through my entire body. "Excuse me?" I'd bristled at the presumption, even as my pulse quickened. "You're different from everyone else in this room," he continued, a slight smile playing at his lips. "You're not here chasing money or status. You're running from something." He was infuriatingly, devastatingly correct. "And what are you running from?" I challenged. "Everything," he admitted, and the raw honesty in that single word disarmed me completely. We talked for hours. He never told me his full name, just Damien, and I was too intoxicated by his presence to press for details. He spoke in vague terms about his work, something involving logistics and shipping, but I sensed layers of danger beneath his polished exterior. I told him about the triplets I'd delivered, about the mother who'd hemorrhaged and nearly died while I'd fought to keep her alive, about the weight of holding tiny lives in my hands. "You save people," he'd said, his dark eyes intense on mine. I'm not sure I've ever saved anyone in my life. There was such profound sadness in those words that I reached out and touched his hand. The contact sent sparks through my entire body. I dated during medical school, had a few relationships that fizzled under the pressure of my career, but I'd never felt anything like this immediate, overwhelming connection to a complete stranger. When he suggested we leave the lounge, I didn't hesitate. Sarah had already gone back to our room, and for once in my carefully controlled life, I wanted to be reckless. I wanted to forget about responsibility and consequence and just feel. His suite was on the top floor, a sprawling penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the glittering chaos of the Strip. The luxury was overwhelming. This was the room of someone with serious money, serious power. I should have been intimidated. Instead, I felt alive. "Are you sure?" he asked me, his hand gentle on my face, giving me one last chance to change my mind. "I'm sure," I whispered. And I was. For that one night, I wanted to be someone different, someone brave and spontaneous and free. What happened between us was unlike anything I'd experienced before. He touched me like I was precious, like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. We didn't just have sex. We connected on some primal level that transcended physical pleasure. When I fell asleep in his arms, I felt safer than I had in years. I woke up at dawn to find him already dressed, sitting on the edge of the bed watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "I have to go," he said, and there was genuine regret in his voice. "Business." "I understand," I replied, even though I didn't, not really. He kissed me one last time, deep and desperate, like he was trying to memorize the taste of me. "I'll find you," he promised. "When I get back to Chicago, I'll find you." But he never asked for my full name. He never asked which hospital I worked at. And I, still caught in the spell of the night, didn't think to ask for his contact information either. When I returned to his suite later that afternoon, hoping to leave him a note with my number, he was gone. The staff claimed they didn't know what I was talking about. There was no guest registered under the name Damien in that room. It was as if the entire night had been a beautiful dream. Back in Chicago, I threw myself into my work with renewed intensity, trying to forget the mysterious man who'd made me feel more alive in one night than I had in years. I told myself it had been exactly what I needed, a brief escape, nothing more. 6 weeks later, I was vomiting into a specimen cup in the hospital bathroom, my hands shaking as I stared at the 2 pink lines on the pregnancy test. I was pregnant, with a stranger's child. A man whose last name I didn't know, whose face I could barely remember in the harsh light of my new reality. I considered my options with the same clinical detachment I used to evaluate patient cases. Abortion, adoption, single motherhood. Each choice felt impossible in different ways. I was barely keeping my head above water as a resident. How could I possibly raise a child alone? But when I saw the heartbeat on the ultrasound at 8 weeks, that tiny flicker of life on the screen, something shifted inside me. This baby wasn't a mistake or a complication. This baby was mine. Mine to protect, mine to love, mine to fight for. I decided to keep it. Him, as I'd learn at the 20-week anatomy scan. I was having a son. My pregnancy was textbook perfect, which felt like the universe's way of compensating for the chaos of my situation. I hid it as long as I could under scrubs and lab coats, but eventually I had to tell my program director. Dr. Richardson was surprisingly supportive, helping me adjust my schedule to accommodate prenatal appointments and ensuring I wasn't assigned to cases involving radiation or infectious diseases. Sarah became my rock, attending Lamaze classes with me and helping me set up a tiny nursery in my cramped one-bedroom apartment. My parents, conservative Catholics who'd always envisioned me married to a nice lawyer or accountant before having children, were disappointed, but ultimately supportive. "That baby is a blessing," my mother said firmly, regardless of how he came to be. I gave birth to my son on November 23rd, after 14 hours of labor. When they placed him on my chest, his dark hair wet and his eyes squeezed shut against the bright lights, I fell in love more profoundly than I'd ever thought possible. I named him Oliver James Hayes, and I promised him that I would be enough, mother and father both, protector and provider, everything he would ever need. And for 20 months, I kept that promise. I juggled residency shifts with daycare drop-offs, studied for board exams while Oliver napped, survived on 4 hours of sleep, and pure maternal determination. My life became a carefully choreographed dance of feeding schedules and diaper changes and pediatrician appointments. I had no time for dating, no energy for anything beyond keeping my son safe and healthy and loved. Oliver was a happy baby, all dimples and giggles, with dark curls and eyes that seemed to see straight through to my soul. Everyone commented on how alert he was, how focused, as if he were taking in every detail of the world around him. He looked nothing like me with my auburn hair and green eyes. Instead, he was the image of his father, a man I'd spent 20 months trying to forget, but whose face I saw every time I looked at my son. I told myself we were fine. We didn't need anyone else. It was just the two of us against the world, and that was enough. Then Oliver got sick. It started with a fever. Nothing alarming at first, just a slight elevation in temperature that I attributed to teething. Oliver had been fussier than usual, refusing his favorite foods and clinging to me with unusual desperation. As a pediatric resident, I knew the signs to watch for, and initially, nothing seemed concerning enough to warrant more than acetaminophen and careful monitoring. But the fever didn't break. By the third day, it had climbed to 103 degrees Fahrenheit, and Oliver had developed a pallor that made my medical instincts scream. His energy had vanished. My normally active toddler lay listless in his crib, barely responding when I called his name. I brought him to the emergency department at Northwestern on a Tuesday morning, my attending privileges allowing me to bypass the usual wait times. Dr. Chen, one of the best pediatric emergency physicians in the hospital, took one look at Oliver and immediately ordered a full workup. The blood tests came back within hours, and the results made my stomach drop. Oliver's hemoglobin was dangerously low, 7.2 grams per deciliter when it should have been between 11 and 13 for a child his age. His platelet count was elevated, and his white blood cell differential showed abnormalities that suggested his bone marrow wasn't functioning properly. "We need to admit him," Dr. Chen said gently, her hand on my shoulder. "Lillian, I know this is terrifying, but we're going to figure out what's happening." They admitted Oliver to the pediatric hematology floor, and suddenly I wasn't Dr. Hayes anymore. I was just a terrified mother watching her child suffer. The pediatric oncology team came to consult, words like aplastic anemia and bone marrow failure floating through the air like poison. They explained that Oliver's bone marrow had essentially stopped producing enough red blood cells, and they needed to investigate why. The next 72 hours were a blur of tests. Bone marrow biopsies that made me sob in the hallway, while Oliver screamed. Genetic panels. Infectious disease workups. Every test came back inconclusive, ruling out causes without providing answers. Meanwhile, Oliver's condition deteriorated. His hemoglobin dropped to 6.8, then 6.3. He needed blood transfusions to stay alive, but with each transfusion came the risk of complications, allergic reactions, iron overload, antibody formation that could make future transfusions more difficult. Dr. Ramirez, the head of pediatric hematology, explained the situation with careful compassion. Oliver has a rare blood type, B negative with additional rare antigens. Finding perfectly matched blood is challenging. We can use partially matched blood, but it's not ideal for long-term management. If we're looking at chronic transfusions while we determine the underlying cause and treatment plan, we really need to find closely matched donors. "Test me," I said immediately. "I'm his mother." They did. I was type A positive, not even close to compatible. The genetic counselor explained that Oliver must have inherited his rare blood type from his father, along with the uncommon antigens that made matching so difficult. His father, the man I'd spent one night with in Las Vegas. The man whose full name I didn't know, whose contact information I'd never obtained, who had vanished like smoke. I sat in the hospital chapel that night, my head in my hands, feeling the weight of my choices crushing me. I'd thought I could do this alone. I'd been so certain that love and determination would be enough. But now my son was dying, and the only person who could help him was a ghost. Sarah found me there at 2 a.m, my eyes red from crying. "There has to be a way to find him," she said firmly. "Think, Lil. What do you remember?" I forced myself to recall every detail of that night. Damien, no last name given. He'd been staying in a penthouse suite at the Venetian. He'd mentioned something about Chicago, about shipping and logistics. He'd moved with the confidence of someone important, dangerous even. The bartender had treated him with deference, almost fear. "He wasn't just wealthy," I said slowly, puzzle pieces clicking together in my exhausted mind. "He was powerful. The way people looked at him, the way they responded to him. It wasn't normal respect. It was something else." Sarah's eyes widened. "You think he was connected? Like organized crime connected?" The thought had occurred to me during those long, sleepless nights after Oliver's birth, but I'd dismissed it as paranoia. Now, faced with the desperate need to find him, I allowed myself to consider it seriously. The secrecy, the cash-only transactions I'd vaguely noticed, the way he'd disappeared without a trace, the penthouse that supposedly had no guest registered. "I don't know what he was," I admitted, "but I know he had resources, power. If I could just find him, he could help. He could save Oliver." We spent the next week searching while Oliver received transfusion after transfusion, each one buying us a little more time. Sarah used her questionable internet skills to dig through social media, public records, anything that might lead us to a man named Damien with connections to Las Vegas and Chicago. I reached out to the Venetian, lying shamelessly about having lost something valuable in that penthouse suite, but they stonewalled me with the efficiency of people trained to protect their high-profile guests. I was losing hope when Dr. Ramirez came to me with unexpected news. "We've been searching the National Bone Marrow Registry for potential matches," she explained. "We found something interesting. There's a man in the Chicago area who's a near-perfect match for Oliver. Same rare blood type, same antigens. He's not in the public database, but he donated blood at a private facility last year, and they shared the information with us given the urgency of Oliver's case." My heart stopped. "Who is he?" "That's the thing. His file is heavily restricted. All we have is a first name and an anonymous donor ID number. But Lillian, this man could save Oliver's life. His blood could buy us time to find a long-term solution, possibly even serve as a bone marrow donor if it comes to that." "What's his name?" I whispered, though I already knew. "Damien." The world tilted on its axis. Against all odds, against all probability, I'd found him. Or rather, fate had delivered him to me in the only way that mattered, as Oliver's salvation. "I need to contact him," I said urgently. "I need to meet him." Dr. Ramirez shook her head. "His file indicates he's a protected donor. We can request blood through the facility, but direct contact would require his consent, and given the restrictions on his file, that seems unlikely." I wasn't going to accept that. I couldn't. My son was dying, and the man who could save him was somewhere in Chicago, close enough to touch but unreachable behind walls of bureaucracy and secrecy. I did something I never thought I'd do. I used my position at the hospital to access information I shouldn't have had. Late one night, when Oliver was sleeping peacefully after another transfusion, I slipped into the records department and pulled every file related to that private donation facility. I cross-referenced names, dates, and donation times until I found what I was looking for. A signature on a waiver form, partially redacted, but still legible. Damien Cross. The name felt like a key turning in a lock. Armed with his full name, I went back to Sarah, and within 48 hours she'd found him. Or rather, found enough about him to make my blood run cold. Damian Cross wasn't just wealthy or powerful. He was Chicago's most feared organized crime figure, the man who controlled the shipping ports and logistics networks throughout the entire Midwest. His name appeared in countless news articles, always in connection to investigations that went nowhere, always surrounded by the best lawyers money could buy, always managing to stay just out of reach of law enforcement. He was dangerous, possibly a murderer, definitely a criminal. Everything I'd dedicated my life to opposing, I saved lives while he, allegedly, took them. And he was Oliver's father, the only person who could save our son. I sat in Oliver's hospital room, watching my baby sleep with an IV in his tiny arm, and made a decision that would change everything. I would find Damian Cross. I would walk into his world, however dangerous it might be. I would throw myself at the mercy of a man who supposedly had none, because I was a mother, and mothers don't have the luxury of fear. Sarah helped me track down the address of Cross Logistics, the legitimate front for Damian's empire. It was housed in a gleaming high-rise in the Loop, all glass and steel and intimidating corporate efficiency. I spent 3 days gathering my courage, arranging for my mother to stay with Oliver, and preparing myself for what I had to do. On a Friday afternoon, I left the hospital for the first time in 2 weeks. I'd lost weight I couldn't afford to lose, and my scrubs hung loose on my frame. I changed into the only professional outfit I owned, a navy dress that was wrinkled from months in my closet, and tried to make myself look like someone who belonged in a building like this. I walked through the lobby with my head high, Oliver's most recent blood work in my bag, along with the DNA test I'd had run using the blood sample from Damian's donation file. Yes, it was probably illegal. Yes, I could lose my medical license if anyone found out. But my son was dying, and legal niceties seemed absurdly unimportant in the face of that reality. The security guard at the desk looked me up and down skeptically. "Can I help you?" "I need to see Damian Cross," I said, proud that my voice didn't shake. "It's urgent." "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but he'll want to see me. Tell him." I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "Tell him Lillian Hayes is here, from Las Vegas, 20 months ago." The guard's skepticism deepened, but he picked up the phone. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I saw his expression change. Surprise, then something like alarm. He hung up quickly. 27th floor, he said, his tone entirely different now. "Someone will meet you at the elevator." The elevator ride felt eternal. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I clutched my bag like a lifeline. The doors opened onto a floor that looked nothing like a typical office. This was luxury on a different level. All dark wood and expensive art, and an atmosphere of carefully controlled power. A woman in an impeccable suit waited for me, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes sharp with curiosity. "Ms. Hayes, follow me, please." She led me down a corridor lined with closed doors, past rooms where I could hear the low murmur of voices conducting business I probably didn't want to know about. At the end of the hall, she paused before a set of double doors. "He's expecting you," she said, then opened the doors and stepped aside. I walked into Damian Cross's office, and for the first time in 20 months, I saw the father of my child again. Damian stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, his back to me, looking out over the Chicago skyline. Even in silhouette, I recognized him. The broad shoulders, the way he held himself with that particular combination of grace and danger. My body remembered him before my mind fully processed his presence, a flutter of recognition that felt almost like coming home. "Close the door," he said, without turning around. His voice was exactly as I remembered, that low rumble that seemed to resonate in my chest. I did as he asked, my hand trembling on the handle. The click of the lock engaging sounded impossibly loud in the silence. He turned then, and I got my first clear look at him in nearly 2 years. He was older, harder somehow, with new lines around his eyes that suggested he'd seen things I couldn't imagine. His dark hair was shorter than I remembered, and he wore a 3-piece suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. But his eyes, those dark, intense eyes that had seen through me that night in Las Vegas, those were exactly the same. "Lillian," he said, and the way he spoke my name made something clench in my chest. "I looked for you." Those 4 words nearly broke me. "You did?" "For months. I went back to that hospital you mentioned, Northwestern Memorial. I described you to every person I could find. Auburn hair, green eyes, obstetrics resident. They said they had no one matching that description in their program." His jaw tightened. "I thought maybe you'd lied to me, that it had just been a game." "I didn't lie," I said quickly. "I was there. I am there. They must have—" I stopped, realization dawning. "You were asking about me. A man like you, with your reputation. They probably stonewalled you on purpose, to protect me." A bitter smile crossed his face. "To protect you from me. Yes, that makes sense." He crossed the room with predatory grace, stopping just outside my personal space. "So why are you here now, Lillian? After 20 months of silence? What changed?" This was it. The moment I'd been dreading and desperately hoping for in equal measure. I reached into my bag with shaking hands and pulled out the folder I'd prepared. Inside were Oliver's medical records, the DNA test results, and a photograph of my son. "This changed," I said, holding the folder out to him. Damien took it, his expression guarded. I watched his face as he opened it, as his eyes scanned the medical records without comprehension, then moved to the DNA results. I saw the exact moment understanding hit him. His whole body went rigid, and his eyes snapped to mine with an intensity that stole my breath. "You have a child," he said, his voice carefully controlled. "My child." "Yes." He looked at the photograph then, and something in his expression cracked. Oliver stared up from the glossy print, his dark curls framing his face, his serious eyes so like his father's that it was almost painful. Damien traced the image with one finger, a gesture so tender it made my eyes sting. "His name is Oliver," I said softly. "Oliver James Hayes. He just turned 20 months old." "Why didn't you tell me?" The question came out rough, almost accusatory. "How could I? I didn't know your last name. I didn't know how to find you. I tried, Damien. I went back to that suite, but it was like you'd never existed. I thought—" My voice broke. "I thought I could do it alone. I thought I could be enough for him." "You should have tried harder." There was anger in his voice now, and pain. 20 months, Lillian. 20 months of my son's life that I missed. First steps, first words. I should have been there. "I know," I whispered. "I know, and I'm sorry. But Damien, I'm not here to apologize. I'm here because—" The words stuck in my throat, and I had to force them out. "I'm here because Oliver is dying." The color drained from his face. "What?" I told him everything. Oliver's illness, the rare blood type, the bone marrow failure, the desperate search for a compatible donor. I explained about the blood he'd donated last year, how it had led me back to him, how he was possibly the only person in the world who could save our son. By the time I finished, Damien had sunk into the leather chair behind his desk, his head in his hands. When he looked up, there was a rawness in his expression I'd never expected to see from someone with his reputation. "You're telling me I have a son, and he's dying, and I'm the only one who can help him." His voice was hollow. "Is that why you're here? Because you need something from me?" The accusation stung, even though it was true. "Yes," I admitted. "I need your blood. Your bone marrow, if it comes to that. I need whatever you can give to keep Oliver alive. And if I couldn't help? If I wasn't a match? Would you even have told me about him?" The question hung between us, heavy and unanswerable. The truth was, I didn't know. Part of me had convinced myself that keeping Oliver away from Damien's dangerous world was the right choice. But another part had ached for my son to know his father, to have that connection, even if it was complicated and dangerous. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I was terrified of you, of what you are, what you do. I wanted to protect Oliver from that life. And now you need me." There was bitterness in his tone, but also something else, a desperate hunger as he looked at Oliver's photograph again. "Now you're willing to bring your son into my dangerous world because you have no other choice." "I would do anything to save him," I said fiercely. "Walk through fire, make deals with the devil himself. You're right. I'm desperate. But I'm also hoping that somewhere inside the man who held me that night in Las Vegas, there's someone who might want to know his son, who might love him enough to help." Damien stood abruptly, pacing to the windows again. I watched the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. When he spoke again, his voice was rough with emotion. "I've done terrible things, Lillian. Things that would make you run screaming if you knew the details. I've hurt people, destroyed lives. I'm not a good man, not by any definition of the word. But that night with you..." He turned to face me. "That night, I felt like someone different. Someone who might deserve something beautiful. And then you were gone, and I convinced myself it had been a dream, a glimpse of a life I could never have." "It wasn't a dream," I said softly. "It was real. And Oliver is real. He's the best thing I've ever done with my life, and he's yours too. You don't have to be perfect to be his father. You just have to show up." He crossed the distance between us in 3 long strides, stopping so close I could smell his cologne, expensive and subtly spiced, exactly as I remembered. "Where is he? Where's my son?" "Northwestern Memorial, pediatric hematology floor, room 427. He's there now, probably sleeping after his last transfusion. My mother is with him. Take me to him." It wasn't a request. Now. I nodded, relief flooding through me so intensely I felt dizzy. "Okay. Yes. But Damien, you need to understand. He's very sick. He looks fragile. It's going to be hard to see him like this." "He's my son," Damien said simply. "I need to see him." We took his car, a sleek black SUV with windows so tinted I couldn't see out. His driver, a massive man who looked like he could break me in half without effort, said nothing as Damien gave him the hospital address. In the back seat, Damien held Oliver's photograph, studying every detail as if trying to memorize the face of the child he'd never met. "Does he look like me?" he asked quietly. "Yes," I admitted. "Everyone comments on it. He has your eyes, your coloring, even some of your expressions. When he's concentrating on something, he gets this little furrow between his eyebrows that's exactly like yours." "What's he like?" "His personality." I found myself smiling despite the gravity of the situation. "He's brilliant, incredibly observant, always watching and learning. He started talking early, full sentences by 15 months. He loves books. I must read him Goodnight Moon 20 times a day. He's gentle with other babies at daycare, always making sure they're okay. And he's stubborn. God, is he stubborn. Once he decides he wants something, he doesn't give up." "He gets that from you," Damien said, the ghost of a smile on his lips. "Maybe a little from both of us." We lapsed into silence for the rest of the drive, both of us lost in our thoughts. I wondered what Damien was thinking, what it felt like to discover you had a child after 20 months of not knowing. I wondered if he resented me for keeping this from him, if the anger I'd seen in his office would resurface once the shock wore off. At the hospital, Damien moved with the same confidence he had in his office building, but here he was out of place, a predator in a healing environment. People gave him a wide berth, something in his bearing warning them away, even though he did nothing overtly threatening. We took the elevator to the 4th floor, and with each passing second, I could feel Damien's tension increasing. His hands clenched and unclenched at his sides, and he took deep, measured breaths like he was preparing for battle. He might be asleep, I warned as we approached room 427. And my mother, she doesn't know about you. She thinks his father is someone who wanted nothing to do with us. Damien's jaw tightened. Let her think what she wants. I'm here now. I pushed open the door quietly. My mother sat in the chair beside Oliver's crib, reading a magazine, but she looked up immediately when we entered. Her eyes widened when she saw Damien, and I watched her put the pieces together with a mother's intuition. The dark hair, the intensity, the way Damien's entire focus zeroed in on the tiny figure in the hospital crib. Mom, I said softly. This is Damien, Oliver's father. She stood slowly, her expression cycling through shock, anger, and something like relief. You found him. He found me, Damien said, his voice hoarse. He'd moved to the crib, standing motionless as he looked down at Oliver for the first time. My son was awake, his dark eyes tracking the stranger with that serious, observant expression I knew so well. He should have been crying. He always cried when strangers got too close. Instead, he simply stared at Damien with what looked like recognition, impossible as that seemed. Can I... Damien's voice broke. Can I hold him? I nodded, moving to the crib. Hey, baby boy, I said softly, stroking Oliver's curls. There's someone here who wants to meet you. I lifted Oliver carefully, mindful of his IV line, and turned to Damien. Support his head. He's weaker than usual because of the anemia, so... But Damien already had his arms positioned correctly, taking Oliver with a gentleness that seemed at odds with everything I knew about him. Our son settled against his father's chest, and something in my heart cracked open at the sight. Damien looked down at Oliver, and I saw tears gathering in his eyes. Hello, son, he whispered. I'm sorry I wasn't here before. I'm sorry I didn't know about you, but I'm here now, and I promise... His voice caught. I promise I'm going to make you better, whatever it takes. Oliver reached up with one tiny hand and touched Damien's face, his expression still so serious. Then, incredibly, he smiled, one of those rare, brilliant smiles that lit up his whole face. Dada, Oliver said clearly, his first word in weeks. Damien made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He pressed his forehead against Oliver's, his shoulders shaking. I reached out instinctively, my hand on Damien's arm, and the three of us stood there in that hospital room, a broken family finding each other against all odds. My mother wiped her eyes and quietly excused herself, giving us space. It was just us now, mother, father, and child. What do we do now? I asked softly. Damien looked up, his eyes fierce with determination. Now we save him. Tell me what needs to happen. Tests, donations, whatever he needs. I'll give everything I have. The medical team will need to do compatibility testing, I explained. Confirm you're a match for both blood transfusions and possibly bone marrow donation. It could take a few days to... I'll make it happen by tomorrow morning, Damien interrupted. I know people. I'll have the best hematologists in the country here if needed. I wanted to argue that he couldn't just throw money and power at medical protocols, but looking at Oliver in his arms, I found I didn't care about the rules anymore. Okay, I said simply. Damien spent the next hour holding Oliver, learning the weight of him, the sound of his sleepy babbling, the way he liked to have his back rubbed. He listened intently as I explained Oliver's routine, his favorite foods, the songs that helped him sleep. He asked 1,000 questions, hungry for every detail of the 20 months he'd missed. When Oliver finally fell asleep, Damien carefully placed him back in the crib, his hand lingering on our son's chest to feel him breathing. Then he turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. I meant what I said. Whatever it takes to save him. Money, resources, influence. All of it is his now. He's my son, and I protect what's mine. There was something almost threatening in those words, a reminder of who and what Damien was. But there was also something comforting, the absolute certainty that he would move heaven and earth for Oliver. "Thank you," I whispered. "Don't thank me," he said roughly. "This is my fault. If I'd tried harder to find you, if I'd gotten your contact information that night, I could have been here from the beginning. I could have kept both of you safe." "We survived," I said. "I managed." "You shouldn't have had to just manage. You should have had help, support. You should have had me." He stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup my face. "I'm sorry, Lillian, for not being there, for not finding you, for leaving you to face this alone." I leaned into his touch despite knowing I shouldn't. "You're here now. That's what matters." "I'm here now," he agreed. "And I'm not going anywhere. Not until Oliver is healthy, and not after. You and him, you're mine to protect now." There was possession in those words, a claiming that should have alarmed me. But standing in that hospital room with my son sleeping peacefully and this dangerous man promising to keep us safe, I found I didn't want to fight it. I just wanted to believe that somehow, impossibly, we were going to be okay. Damien wasn't kidding about making things happen. By the next morning, he'd assembled a team of specialists from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, and Cleveland Clinic, all flown in on his private jet and willing to consult on Oliver's case immediately. Dr. Ramirez looked simultaneously impressed and concerned by this display of power, but she couldn't argue with the results. Within 48 hours, they'd completed the full compatibility testing. Damien was a perfect match, not just for blood transfusions, but for bone marrow donation if it came to that. The genetic counselor looked at the results with barely concealed amazement. "The compatibility is extraordinary," she said. "It's like his bone marrow was designed specifically for Oliver." "Because he's my son," Damien said simply, as if that explained everything. They started the transfusion protocol immediately. I watched Damien lie in the donation chair, his expensive suit jacket draped over a nearby chair, his shirt sleeves rolled up to reveal surprisingly muscular forearms. He didn't flinch when they inserted the needle, his eyes fixed on Oliver's crib across the room. "Does it hurt?" I asked, sitting beside him. "No," he lied, and I knew it was a lie because I'd done enough blood donations during medical school to know the discomfort of the process. But Damien didn't so much as wince, his face a mask of careful neutrality. Oliver's response to the transfusion was dramatic. Within hours, color returned to his face. Within days, his energy came back. He started playing with his toys again, giggling at peekaboo, demanding to be read his favorite books. The medical team was cautiously optimistic. The transfusion had bought us time, but we still needed to address the underlying bone marrow failure. Damien was there for all of it. He showed up every morning at 7, still dressed in his expensive suits, but increasingly rumpled as the days wore on. He learned Oliver's routine, took over some of the feeding and diaper changes, sang lullabies in a surprisingly good voice that made Oliver's eyes go heavy with sleep. I watched this dangerous man become a father, and it was the most remarkable transformation I'd ever witnessed. With Oliver, Damien was gentle, patient, utterly devoted. He talked to our son constantly, explaining everything he did, as if making up for lost time by filling Oliver's world with words. "You see these buildings out the window?" Damien would say, holding Oliver up to look out over the city. "Your dad owns some of those. Legal businesses, I promise. When you're older, you can help me run them if you want. Or you can be a doctor like your mom, or an astronaut. Whatever you want, Oliver. The world is yours." It should have been strange, this mob boss planning futures for a toddler in a hospital room. Instead, it felt right in a way I couldn't explain. But Damien's presence in our lives came with complications. His men, bodyguards, I assumed, took up positions in the hospital corridor, making the nursing staff nervous and drawing attention from hospital administration. Detective Morgan from the Organized Crime Unit showed up one afternoon, ostensibly checking on Oliver, but clearly there to investigate Damien's sudden involvement. "Ms. Hayes," the detective said, pulling me aside, "I need to ask you some questions about Damien Cross." "He's Oliver's father," I said firmly. "He's here because his son is sick. That's all." "Damien Cross doesn't do anything without an angle," Morgan warned. "Whatever he's told you, whatever he's promised, remember what he is. He's dangerous, Ms. Hayes. You and your son could get caught in the crossfire of his world." I wanted to argue, to defend Damien, but I couldn't. Because Morgan was right. I knew what Damien was, what he did. I'd seen the news reports, heard the rumors whispered by other hospital staff, once they realized who was spending every day in Oliver's room. That night, after Oliver fell asleep and my mother had gone home, I confronted Damien about it. "The police are watching you. Watching us now because of your connection to Oliver. Is that going to be a problem?" Damien was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on our sleeping son. "Yes," he finally admitted. "My world isn't safe, Lillian. I've been trying to figure out how to keep you and Oliver separate from it. But the truth is, the moment you walked into my office, you made yourself a target. My enemies will see Oliver as leverage. Your connection to me puts you both in danger." Fear clutched at my chest. "Then maybe you should stay away. Maybe we should—" "No." The word came out hard, absolute. Damien turned to face me, his expression fierce. "I'm not walking away from my son. Not now. Not ever. What I am going to do is make sure you're both protected. I'm going to make sure no one can touch you." "How?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. "By making it known that you and Oliver are under my protection. By putting security on you. Real security. People who know how to handle threats. By moving you out of that apartment in Ravenswood and into somewhere secure. I can't just uproot my life because—" "Your son almost died," Damien interrupted, his voice sharp. "He's better now because of the transfusion, but the underlying problem isn't solved yet. He's going to need ongoing care, possibly bone marrow transplant, definitely long-term monitoring. You can't do that while working 80-hour weeks as a resident. You can't do that while living paycheck to paycheck, constantly stressed about money and childcare. So, what are you suggesting? Let me help. Let me take care of you both. Not because you're weak or incapable, but because you shouldn't have to do this alone anymore." He stepped closer, his hand gentle on my face. "I have resources, Lillian. Money isn't an issue. I can hire the best nannies, the best medical care, provide everything Oliver needs. I can give you the time and space to focus on being his mother without constantly worrying about survival." It was tempting. God, it was so tempting. The thought of not having to choose between sleep and studying, of not calculating grocery costs to the penny, of knowing Oliver would have everything he needed without me having to break myself to provide it. But accepting Damien's help meant accepting his world, all the danger and complications that came with it. I don't want Oliver growing up thinking that crime pays. I said softly. I don't want him to think that power and money are more important than doing the right thing. Damien's expression hardened. You think I don't know that? You think I want my son to follow in my footsteps? He laughed bitterly. I've done things I can never take back, Lillian. I've hurt people, destroyed lives, built an empire on fear and blood money. Every night I lie awake thinking about the man I've become. And now I have a son. This perfect, innocent child. And all I can think about is how to keep him from becoming me. The raw pain in his voice broke something in me. I reached for his hand, threading my fingers through his. Then help me raise him differently. Be his father, but show him there's another way. Use your resources for good, not just for power. It's not that simple, Damien said, but there was something in his eyes. A glimmer of hope, maybe, or desire for redemption. Nothing about this is simple, I agreed. But we figure it out together. For Oliver. For Oliver, he echoed. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Ramirez, who'd been running additional tests on Oliver's bone marrow samples. Her expression was grave as she entered the room. I have results from the genetic analysis, she said without preamble. Oliver's condition isn't just aplastic anemia. He has a rare genetic mutation called dyskeratosis congenita. It affects his bone marrow's ability to regenerate blood cells. It's hereditary, which means he inherited the mutation from one of you. Damien and I exchanged looks. Which one? I asked. From you, Mr. Cross. You're a carrier for the mutation. You likely have no symptoms because you only have one copy of the gene, but Oliver inherited 2 copies, one from each of you, which is why he's symptomatic. I saw Damien's face go pale. So this is my fault. I gave this to him. It's not about fault, Dr. Ramirez said quickly. It's genetics, not a choice. But this diagnosis does change Oliver's treatment plan. He's going to need a bone marrow transplant, and sooner rather than later. The good news is that Mr. Cross, as his father and a perfect match, can be his donor. The success rate for sibling or parent donors in cases like this is very high. Damien didn't hesitate. When? When can we do it? We need to get Oliver stronger first. The transfusions are helping with that. I'd say 6 to 8 weeks to prepare him for the transplant procedure. During that time, we'll need to run more tests on you, Mr. Cross, to ensure you're healthy enough to donate. I'll do it, Damien said immediately. Whatever needs to happen, whatever you need from me, I'll do it. After Dr. Ramirez left, Damien stood at Oliver's crib, his hand resting on our son's small back. I gave him this disease, he said quietly. My DNA, my genes, they're hurting him. And your bone marrow is going to save him, I countered. Biology isn't morality, Damien. You didn't choose to be a carrier any more than Oliver chose to be sick. What matters is what you do now. He turned to me, his eyes haunted. What if I'm not enough? What if I fail him? I moved to stand beside him, my hand covering his on Oliver's back. Then we fail together. But I don't think we're going to fail. I think we're going to save him, and then we're going to figure out how to be the family he deserves. Family, Damien repeated, the word sounding foreign on his tongue. I've never had that. Not really. My father was a monster who taught me everything I know about violence and control. My mother left when I was 8. I built an empire, but I've been alone in it. You're not alone anymore, I said softly. He pulled me into his arms then, a sudden, desperate movement that pressed me against his chest. I could feel his heart racing, could feel the tension in every line of his body. I'm terrified, he admitted into my hair. Terrified of failing him. Terrified of losing you both now that I've found you. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him as tightly as he held me. I'm terrified too. But we're in this together now. All three of us. We stood like that for long minutes, holding each other while Oliver slept peacefully beside us. It wasn't romantic exactly. It was too raw, too fragile for that. But it was real and honest, and the beginning of something I couldn't quite name. The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Damien followed through on his promise to provide security. 2 trained bodyguards, James and Marcus, who were surprisingly gentle and unobtrusive despite their intimidating size. He moved us into a penthouse apartment in his building, a sprawling space with a nursery that looked like something from a magazine spread and a kitchen that actually had room to cook. I initially resisted, arguing that I needed to maintain my independence. But the first night in that apartment, when Oliver woke up crying, and I didn't have to struggle with him alone in a cramped bedroom while worrying about disturbing the neighbors, I admitted defeat. This was better for Oliver, and that's what mattered. Damien was there every day, learning to be a father with an intensity that would have been overwhelming if it wasn't so earnest. He read every parenting book I recommended, attended every doctor's appointment, learned Oliver's schedule down to the minute. He sang the same lullabies I did, read the same bedtime stories, mastered the exact way Oliver liked his bottles prepared. Watching him with our son did something to my heart I couldn't explain. This dangerous man who supposedly ran the Chicago underworld would spend hours building block towers just to watch Oliver knock them down with glee. He carried Oliver around the apartment, narrating everything they saw, his deep voice patient and warm. He learned to change diapers without complaint, to comfort Oliver when he was fussy, to play peekaboo until they were both laughing. And slowly, carefully, something began to grow between Damien and me. It started with small moments, our hands brushing as we both reached for Oliver, shared smiles over our son's head, quiet conversations after Oliver fell asleep. The attraction from that night in Las Vegas was still there, simmering beneath the surface, but now it was complicated by something deeper. Partnership, maybe, or the beginning of real understanding. One night, 3 weeks before Oliver's scheduled transplant, Damien found me crying in the kitchen. I'd just gotten off the phone with my program director, who was growing increasingly concerned about my absence from the hospital. My residency was in jeopardy, and while I knew I'd make the same choice again, Oliver came first, always. The thought of losing my career after sacrificing so much for it hurt more than I wanted to admit. Damien pulled me into his arms without a word, letting me cry against his chest. When I finally calmed down enough to explain, he was quiet for a long time. "What if you didn't have to choose?" he finally said. "What do you mean?" "What if you could finish your residency without the impossible schedule? What if you could be there for Oliver and still become the doctor you've worked so hard to be?" "That's not how medicine works," I said bitterly. "You can't just half-ass a residency. But you could defer, couldn't you? Take a year off for Oliver's health, then return when he's stable. I can make sure you don't have to worry about money during that time. And I know people on the hospital board. I could make sure your spot is held." The offer was generous, but the way he said, "I know people on the hospital board," reminded me of exactly who he was and how he operated. "I don't want you bribing people for me." "It's not bribery," Damien said patiently. "It's networking, using my resources to help the people I care about. Let me do this, Lillian. Let me make this one thing easier for you." I wanted to refuse on principle, but the truth was, I was exhausted, stretched so thin I could barely function. The thought of being able to focus on Oliver during his recovery without constantly worrying about my career was almost unbearably tempting. "Okay," I finally whispered. "But after Oliver is better, I go back. I finish my training. I become a doctor." "Of course," Damien agreed immediately. "I would never ask you to give up your dreams. I just want to make sure you can pursue them without destroying yourself in the process." He kissed my forehead then, a gentle gesture that felt both comforting and dangerous. I looked up at him, and the expression in his eyes made my breath catch. hunger and tenderness mixed together in equal measure. "Lillian," he said softly, and I knew he was going to kiss me. I should have stopped him. We had too much to figure out, too many complications. But when his lips met mine, I forgot all the reasons this was a bad idea. The kiss was slow and deep, nothing like the desperate passion of Las Vegas. This was different, a promise, a question, an acknowledgement of everything that had grown between us. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. "I'm falling in love with you," Damien admitted, his forehead resting against mine. "I know I shouldn't. I know my world is dangerous and complicated. But I can't help it. You and Oliver, you're everything I never knew I needed." My heart hammered in my chest. "I don't know what I feel," I admitted honestly. "I'm grateful and attracted to you, and sometimes I think I could love you. But I'm also terrified of you, of what you're capable of what dating you would mean for Oliver and me." "I understand," Damien said, though I could see the hurt in his eyes. "I just needed you to know how I feel." We didn't discuss it again, but something had shifted. The air between us felt charged, every casual touch electric with possibility. We moved around each other with careful awareness, both of us hyper-conscious of the growing tension. The night before Oliver's transplant, Damien found me pacing the penthouse living room at 2 a.m. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Terrified," I admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if his body rejects the bone marrow? What if—" Damien crossed the room and took my face in his hands, forcing me to meet his eyes. "Nothing is going to go wrong. I'm giving him my bone marrow. Part of me is going to be part of him forever. That connection, that biological bond, it's going to help his body accept the donation. I feel it." "That's not how medicine works," I said, but I wanted to believe him. "Maybe not. But I'm making you a promise anyway. Oliver is going to be fine. We're going to save him, together. And then we're going to watch him grow up. We're going to teach him to ride a bike and help him with homework and embarrass him at his graduation. All of it, Lillian. We're going to have all of it." I kissed him then, desperately, needing the comfort and certainty he offered. He kissed me back with equal intensity, his hands gentle despite the passion between us. We made our way to the couch, and for the first time since that night in Las Vegas, we were together again. Afterward, lying in his arms, I let myself imagine the future he'd described. The three of us, a real family, facing whatever came next together. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," I whispered into the darkness. Damien's arms tightened around me. "Then we'll figure out the rest as we go." The morning of Oliver's bone marrow transplant dawned gray and cold, Chicago's November wind rattling the windows of our penthouse. I'd barely slept, spending most of the night watching Oliver breathe, memorizing every detail of his face as if I might lose him. Damien had stayed with us, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of my anxiety. We arrived at Northwestern at 6 a.m. earlier than necessary, but neither of us could stand waiting any longer. The transplant unit was on the 8th floor, a specialized ward where immunocompromised patients received the kind of intensive care Oliver would need. Dr. Ramirez met us there, her expression professionally calm, though I'd worked with her long enough to see the concern beneath. "Everything is ready," she assured us. "Mr. Cross, we'll take you first for the harvest procedure. It'll take about 2 hours under general anesthesia. Oliver's procedure will begin once we have your bone marrow." I watched them prep Damien, my emotions a tangled mess. This dangerous man was about to undergo surgery to save our son, literally giving part of himself to keep Oliver alive. He caught my eye before they wheeled him away, and the love I saw there took my breath away. "Take care of our boy," he said. "I'll be back soon." The wait was agony. I sat with Oliver in the pre-op room, holding him while nurses prepared his IV lines and medications. He was remarkably calm for a 22-month-old about to undergo major surgery, as if he somehow understood the gravity of the situation. "Mama," he said, patting my face with his small hand. "Dada?" "Dada's helping you," I told him, my voice thick with emotion. "He's giving you something very special so you can get all better." "Love Dada," Oliver said seriously, and I had to turn away so he wouldn't see me cry. My mother arrived just as they were taking Oliver back to the OR. She wrapped me in her arms while I sobbed, all the fear and stress of the past months finally overwhelming me. "He's going to be okay," she murmured. "That man, Damien, he loves that boy. You can see it every time he looks at Oliver. A father's love is powerful medicine." I wanted to believe her. I had to believe her, because the alternative was unthinkable. The transplant took 4 hours. 4 hours of pacing the surgical waiting room, drinking terrible coffee, and trying not to imagine everything that could go wrong. James and Marcus, Damien's bodyguards, maintained their vigil by the door, their presence a reminder that we existed in 2 worlds simultaneously. The medical world where I was a doctor, and Damien's world where danger lurked around every corner. Dr. Ramirez found me first. "Oliver came through beautifully," she said, and I nearly collapsed with relief. "The transplant went exactly as planned. We're moving him to the isolation room now. His immune system will be essentially non-existent for the next few weeks as his body integrates the new bone marrow, so we'll need to maintain strict sterile protocols." "And Damien?" "He's in recovery. The harvest went well, though he'll be sore for several days. He's asking to see Oliver." They let us both into Oliver's room once Damien could walk. Our son looked so small in the hospital bed, surrounded by monitors and IV lines. But he was alive. His color was already better than it had been in weeks. Damien moved to the bedside carefully, his own pain obvious in the way he held himself. He touched Oliver's hand gently, his expression a mixture of love and fierce protectiveness. "You did so good, buddy," he whispered. "So brave. Now, you just have to rest and let my cells make you strong again." Oliver's eyes fluttered open, unfocused from the anesthesia but finding his father's face. "Dada," he murmured. "I'm here," Damien promised. "I'm right here, and I'm not going anywhere." The next 3 weeks were the hardest of my life. Oliver had to stay in complete isolation to prevent infection while his immune system recovered. Only Damien and I were allowed in his room, and only after extensive sterilization protocols. We took shifts, one of us always with Oliver, while the other rested or ate or tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Damien surprised me by how naturally he took to the role. He read to Oliver for hours, his deep voice steady and soothing, even when our son was too sick to respond. He learned to work the medical equipment, changing IV bags and adjusting monitors with the efficiency of a trained nurse. And when Oliver was in pain, crying from the inevitable side effects of the transplant, Damien held him through it all, his own discomfort from the harvest procedure forgotten. I fell more in love with him every day, though I was terrified to fully admit it. This wasn't the man I'd met in Las Vegas, nor was it the crime boss whose reputation had made me fear for Oliver's safety. This was someone new. A father fighting with everything he had to save his child, a man capable of extraordinary gentleness despite the violence in his past. "Tell me about your business," I asked him one night while Oliver slept. We were both exhausted, sitting on opposite sides of the hospital room, but I needed to understand who Damien really was. He was quiet for a long time. "What do you want to know?" "The truth. All of it. I hesitated. "I can't let myself love you completely if I don't understand what I'm getting into." Damien nodded slowly. Fair enough. He took a deep breath. My father ran the Chicago docks for 30 years. Violent, brutal man who ruled through fear. I grew up watching him hurt people, watching him build an empire on blood and intimidation. When I was 16, he forced me to make my first kill, a rival's lieutenant who'd been skimming profits. I've never forgotten the look on that man's face. I stayed silent, letting him continue. My father died when I was 24, and I took over. For years, I ran things the same way he did: violence, fear, control. I told myself I was better than him because I had rules, codes of conduct. No drugs in schools, no trafficking, no hurting civilians. But I still hurt people, Lillian. I still destroyed lives to maintain my power. And now? I asked softly. Now I have a son. Now I have you. And I look at Oliver sleeping there, and I think about the world I'm bringing him into. He met my eyes. I want to be better. I want to build something legitimate, something he can be proud of. But I don't know if I can. My empire isn't something I can just walk away from. There are people who depend on me, people who would see any weakness as an opportunity to strike. So what are you going to do? Change it from the inside. Slowly, carefully, transition my operations to legitimate businesses. The logistics company is already legal. I can expand that. The real estate holdings, the shipping contracts, the construction companies, all of that can be cleaned up. It'll take years, and it'll be dangerous. But I'm going to do it. For Oliver. For the chance to be someone he can look up to. I crossed the room and took his hand. That's all I needed to hear. That you want to change. That you're willing to try. Does that mean you'll give us a chance? Really give us a chance, not just for Oliver's sake, but for us. I kissed him, pouring everything I felt into it. Yes, I whispered against his lips. Yes, I'll give us a chance. Oliver's body began accepting the transplant on day 19. His blood counts started rising, slowly at first, then with increasing strength. By day 25, he was showing signs of engraftment. Damien's bone marrow was taking hold, creating new, healthy blood cells. Dr. Ramirez was cautiously ecstatic. This is excellent progress. The genetic match was even better than we hoped. At this rate, Oliver should be able to go home in another week. Home. The penthouse Damien had moved us into had become home somehow, though I'd resisted thinking of it that way. But hearing Dr. Ramirez say it made it real. We were going to take our son home, healthy and whole. The night before Oliver's discharge, Damien disappeared for several hours. I tried not to worry, tried to trust that he was handling legitimate business. But I couldn't help the anxiety that crept in. When he finally returned, he was accompanied by his lawyer and carrying an envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Insurance," he said simply. "Legal documents establishing Oliver as my heir and beneficiary. If anything happens to me, and in my world, that's always a possibility. He'll be taken care of. Everything I have goes to him, with you as trustee until he's 18. The implications of what he was saying hit me hard. Damien, nothing is going to happen to you. You don't know that. I have enemies, Lillian. People who'd love to see me dead. I need to know that if I fall, you and Oliver will be protected." He pulled out another set of documents. "These are for you. A trust fund, properties in your name, accounts that can't be touched by anyone else. I don't want you to ever have to depend on me for survival. I want you to have choices." I stared at the papers, overwhelmed. "This is too much. I can't. You can, and you will. For Oliver's sake, if not your own." He pulled me close. "I love you, Lillian Hayes. I love you with everything I am, everything I've been, and everything I'm trying to become. Let me do this. Let me provide for you both. I love you too, I admitted, the words coming easier this time. I love you, and it terrifies me because your world is so dangerous. But I also know that without you, Oliver wouldn't be alive right now. You saved him. You saved us both. We brought Oliver home on a Wednesday. The penthouse had been transformed, a new air filtration system to protect Oliver's still fragile immune system, monitoring equipment that would make a hospital jealous, and a nursery that looked like something from a dream. But more than that, it felt like a real home now, filled with the evidence of our life together. Oliver's toys scattered across the floor, family photos on the walls, the comfortable clutter of people actually living there. Damien was a revelation as a father now that Oliver was home. He worked from the penthouse most days, conducting his business from his home office while remaining available for Oliver's needs. He learned to make Oliver's favorite meals, mastered the art of bath time, and could calm a tantrum with the efficiency of a seasoned parent. I watched him sing Oliver to sleep one night, his deep voice gentle on the lullaby, and realized that this simple domestic moment, was what I'd been searching for without knowing it. Not the passionate stranger from Las Vegas, not the dangerous crime boss, but this man who'd learned to put our son's needs above everything else. What are you thinking? Damien asked, catching me watching from the doorway. That I never imagined this, I admitted. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought I'd be doing this alone forever. And now here you are, and I searched for the right words. You're perfect at this. He carefully extracted himself from Oliver's crib and came to me, pulling me into his arms. I'm not perfect. Far from it. But I'm trying. Every day, I'm trying to be the father Oliver deserves, and the man you need. You're succeeding, I told him, and meant it. We made love that night for the first time since Oliver came home, careful and tender, reconnecting in the way only parents of a sick child can truly understand. It wasn't just physical. It was a celebration of survival, of family, of futures we'd almost lost. Afterward, lying in Damien's arms, I let myself believe that maybe, impossibly, we were going to be okay. We had Oliver, healthy and thriving. We had each other, building something real despite the odds. And we had hope that Damien's promised transformation would succeed, hope that we could create a life free from the darkness of his past. I should have known that hope is a dangerous thing in Damien's world. The threat came 3 months after Oliver's transplant, just when we'd started to believe we might actually be safe. I was at Northwestern for a follow-up residency meeting. Damien had made good on his promise to secure my spot when I was ready to return, when James called me with controlled urgency in his voice. Dr. Hayes, you need to come back to the penthouse immediately. There's been a situation. My blood turned to ice. Oliver? Is Oliver okay? Oliver is fine. He's with Mr. Cross in the secure room, but there's been a credible threat against the family. We're implementing full lockdown protocols. I left the hospital at a run, James and Marcus flanking me as we raced to the car. The drive back to the penthouse felt eternal, my mind spinning with worst-case scenarios. What had I been thinking, letting Oliver get involved in Damien's world? What if something happened to our son because of his father's past? The penthouse was transformed when I arrived. More security personnel I'd never seen before manned every entrance. The windows had been covered with what looked like bulletproof shutters. And in the master bedroom, which had been converted into a fortified safe room, I found Damien holding Oliver, his expression grimmer than I'd ever seen it. What happened? I demanded, taking Oliver from him and checking our son over frantically. He seemed fine, confused but unharmed, reaching for his father with chubby hands. Viktor Kozlov, Damien said, his voice hard. He runs the Russian operations in Chicago. We've had an uneasy truce for years, but he's been pushing into my territory. I've been shutting him down through legal channels, buying out his properties, offering his people better deals to come work for me. He's losing power, and he doesn't like it. What does that have to do with us? Damien's jaw tightened. He sent a message. Photos of you and Oliver at the park last week. A note saying that if I don't back off, he'll take from me what I value most. Terror and rage warred in my chest. He threatened our son? He won't get near Oliver, Damien promised, his voice deadly. I've already moved on this. My people are locating every property he owns, every person who works for him. By morning, Viktor Kozlov won't have an empire left to threaten us with. And what happens when he retaliates? When he comes after us with nothing left to lose? He won't get the chance. There was something in Damien's eyes that reminded me exactly who and what he was. I'm ending this tonight. I knew what he meant, knew what ending this implied in his world. And despite everything I believed in, despite my oath to do no harm, I found I didn't care. Someone had threatened my child, and I wanted them destroyed. What do you need me to do? I asked. Damien looked at me in surprise. Stay here. Keep Oliver safe. That's all I need you to do. No. I held his gaze. If you're doing this, if you're protecting our family, then we do it together. Tell me what's happening. All of it. Over the next hour, Damien explained his plan. He'd been working with the FBI for the past 6 months, feeding them information about Kozlov's illegal operations in exchange for immunity and help transitioning his own businesses to legitimate operations. Tonight, they were going to raid every Kozlov property simultaneously, making arrests that would dismantle his entire organization. I'm not killing him, Damien said quietly. The man I was before Oliver might have. But I promised you I'd change, and that starts now. Kozlov goes to prison. His empire falls apart. And we stay clean. I kissed him fiercely. I'm proud of you. Don't be proud yet. This is just the beginning. I have years of cleanup ahead of me, years of making amends and changing how I operate. It's not going to be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. The raids happened that night as planned. By morning, Viktor Kozlov and 17 of his top lieutenants were in federal custody, facing charges ranging from racketeering to human trafficking. The news called it the biggest organized crime bust in Chicago history. Detective Morgan showed up at our penthouse 2 days later, and I braced for the worst. Instead, she looked at Damien with something almost like respect. I never thought I'd see the day, she said. Damien Cross, working with the feds, turning on your own world. It's not my world anymore, Damien replied. I have a son now. Different priorities. Morgan's expression softened as she looked at Oliver, who was playing with blocks on the floor, oblivious to the adult conversation. He's beautiful. Lucky kid, having parents who love him enough to change their whole lives. After she left, I asked Damien what came next. More of the same, he admitted. Working with the feds to clean up the rest of my operations, transitioning everything to legitimate business. It's going to take years, and some people in my organization won't like it, but I'm doing it anyway. For Oliver. For all of us. I want to be able to look my son in the eye when he's older and tell him the truth about who I was and who I became. I want him to be proud of me, not afraid or ashamed. 6 months later, something remarkable happened. Damien had been working with a group of federal prosecutors who'd noticed patterns in his business records, patterns that suggested he'd been keeping detailed documentation of crimes he'd witnessed or participated in for years. When they approached him about it, he admitted the truth. I've been keeping records since I took over from my father, he told me that night. Evidence of every deal, every crime, every corrupt official or business partner. I told myself it was insurance, a way to protect myself if things went south. But really, I think part of me always hoped I'd have a chance to use it for something better. What are you going to do with it? Give it to them. All of it. It'll implicate people I've worked with, people who trusted me. But it'll also bring down corrupt cops, dirty politicians, and criminals worse than I ever was. It'll hurt, but it's the right thing to do. The fallout from Damien's cooperation was massive. Over the next year, his testimony and documentation led to more than 200 arrests across Chicago and the Midwest. Politicians, law enforcement officials, other crime families, all of them fell like dominoes. Damien himself faced charges for his past crimes, but the combination of his cooperation and the evidence he provided resulted in a plea deal that kept him out of prison. During all of this, Oliver thrived. The transplant had been completely successful, and by his second birthday, his bone marrow was functioning perfectly. He was a healthy, happy toddler who called Damien, Dada, and me, Mama, with equal enthusiasm, who had no idea how close he'd come to dying or how dramatically his existence had changed both our lives. I returned to my residency part-time, working with a schedule that allowed me to be home with Oliver most evenings. Damien transformed his logistics empire into one of the most respected shipping companies in the country, winning contracts with major corporations who'd never have touched him before. He started a foundation dedicated to pediatric cancer research, donating millions to the hospital that had saved Oliver's life. And slowly, carefully, we built a real life together. Not the fantasy from Las Vegas, not the desperate partnership of Oliver's illness, but something genuine and lasting. We argued about normal things, whose turn it was to do dishes, how to handle Oliver's tantrums, whether to have another child. We laughed together, made love, supported each other through hard days, and celebrated the good ones. 18 months after Oliver's transplant, Damien proposed. Not in some elaborate public display, but in our living room after we'd put Oliver to bed, with a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, the only good thing he'd inherited from his family. "I know I'm not perfect," he said, on one knee in our pajamas because that's who we were now. "I know I have a past that will always follow me. But I love you, Lillian. I love the life we've built together. I love watching you be Oliver's mother, and I want to make it official. Will you marry me?" I said yes without hesitation. We got married 6 months later in a small ceremony at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, in the chapel where I'd spent so many terrified hours praying for Oliver's survival. It seemed fitting. This place where everything had almost fallen apart was also where we'd found our way to each other. Oliver was our ring bearer, proud and serious in his tiny suit, carrying the rings on a pillow, with the focus of a child who understood he had an important job. My mother cried. Sarah was my maid of honor. And James and Marcus, Damien's bodyguards who'd become more like family, stood as his best men. Detective Morgan showed up uninvited but welcome, watching from the back row with a smile. "Never thought I'd see the day," she murmured to me after the ceremony. Damien Cross, married to a doctor, doting on his kid, running a legitimate business. "You reformed the unreformable." "He reformed himself," I corrected. "I just gave him a reason." 5 years after that night in Las Vegas, I stood in our penthouse, watching Damien teach Oliver how to play chess. Our son was 3.5 now, brilliantly bright and eerily perceptive, asking questions about everything and listening to answers with the same intense focus his father showed. "But why can't the night move in straight lines?" Oliver asked, his small face scrunched in concentration. "Because every piece has its own special way of moving," Damien explained patiently. "That's what makes the game interesting. You have to learn how each piece works and use them together to win. Like how Mama's good at fixing people and you're good at business?" Oliver asked with the innocent logic of a toddler. Damien laughed, pulling our son into his lap. "Exactly like that. We all have different strengths, but together we're stronger." I felt the flutter in my belly, the subtle movement of the baby I was carrying, the daughter we'd planned for and welcomed. This pregnancy was different from Oliver's, wanted, celebrated, shared with a partner who was there for every moment. We'd found out just last week we were having a girl, and Damien had cried when we saw her on the ultrasound. "Another chance to do it right," he'd whispered, his hand on my still flat stomach. "Another chance to be the father I should have been from the beginning." "You are the father you should be," I'd assured him. "You've been exactly what Oliver and I needed, exactly when we needed you." Now, watching him with our son, I knew it was true. Yes, Damien's past was complicated. Yes, there were still people who looked at him with suspicion, who would never forget what he'd been. But every day, he chose to be better. Every day he chose us. The foundation he'd started had grown into a major force in pediatric medicine, funding research and providing free care to families who couldn't afford treatment. He'd hired other former criminals, giving them legitimate opportunities to rebuild their lives. He'd become an advocate for criminal justice reform, using his story to push for better rehabilitation programs and second chances. And more than any of that, he'd become the father Oliver deserved. Patient, loving, present in every way that mattered. He'd learned to braid hair for our daughter, practiced his tea party etiquette, and could sing every children's song ever written. He coached Oliver's little league team, attended every school event, and tucked our children in every single night, no matter what business crisis demanded his attention. "Mama," Oliver called, waving me over. "Come play chess with us." I joined them on the floor, Damien's arm wrapping around my waist as Oliver showed me the pieces he'd learned. Our daughter kicked against my ribs, and Damien's hand found my belly automatically, feeling her movement with the same wonder he'd shown at every milestone of this pregnancy. "I love you," I told him, not for the first time that day, and not for the last. "I love you both," he replied, pulling Oliver close so we were all touching. "All of you. You're everything I never knew I needed." Later that night, after Oliver was asleep and Damien and I were alone, he pulled me onto the balcony to look out over Chicago. The city glittered beneath us, millions of lives unfolding in the darkness. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "That night in Las Vegas? Everything that came after?" I thought about the question seriously, thought about the fear and struggle of single motherhood, the terror of Oliver's illness, the complications of loving a man with Damien's history. But I also thought about Oliver's laugh, about this baby growing inside me, about the family we'd built from chaos and desperation. "Not for a second," I said. "That night gave me Oliver. It gave me you. It gave me this life I never could have imagined." Was it hard? Yes. Terrifying? Absolutely. But I wouldn't change a single moment, because all of it led us here. Damien kissed me deeply, his hands cradling my face like I was something precious. "I don't deserve you," he murmured against my lips. "That's not for you to decide," I told him. "I chose you. I keep choosing you, and I'll choose you every day for the rest of our lives." We stood there together, looking out at the city where our story had unfolded, where we'd found each other against impossible odds. Somewhere out there were other women, pregnant and alone, wondering if they could survive. Somewhere were other men, trapped by their pasts, believing they could never change. I hoped they found what we'd found, the courage to ask for help, the strength to transform, the grace to forgive and be forgiven. Because if a medical resident and a crime boss could build a family from a one-night stand and a dying child, then anything was possible. Our story wasn't perfect. It wasn't the romance novels promised or the fairy tales suggested. But it was ours, messy and complicated and real. And as Damien led me back inside where our son slept and our daughter grew, I knew that this imperfect, impossible life was more than I'd ever dreamed of wanting. 20 months of resisting alone had led me to collapse into Damien's arms with the words, "Sir, you're the father. I need you." But what I'd found was so much more than just help with Oliver's illness. I'd found a partner, a family, and a love that had transformed both of us into people we never thought we could be. And that, I realized, was the real miracle. Not Oliver's survival, though that was miraculous enough. The real miracle was that two broken people had found each other in the chaos, had chosen to build something beautiful from the ruins of their pasts, and had created a family that proved redemption was always possible. As I crawled into bed beside Damien that night, his hand finding mine in the darkness, I sent a silent thank you to whatever force had brought us together. Fate, chance, or just the random collision of two desperate souls in a Las Vegas casino. Whatever it was, I was grateful. Oliver would grow up knowing his father's past, but also knowing the man his father had become. Our daughter would be born into a family built on honesty and second chances. And Damien and I would face whatever came next together, partners in every sense of the word. The story that had started with a one-night stand and a dying child had become something none of us could have predicted. A family forged in crisis, tempered by love, and ultimately redeemed by the simple choice to keep trying, keep changing, keep fighting for each other. And in the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.